I'll just get you some things. In a thyroid case, when you are having a thyroid case, there is something called as always I tell you, no, whenever you are seeing some cases, you should have some aim in your mind what you are going to do. Like that, always run the projector on one side, what are all the structures present there. So from the skin, subcutaneous tissue, with the platysma, deep cervical fascia, trachea, all these things. In the midline, trachea, esophagus, all this thyroid, all is going to be there. But in the lateral side, it's going to be different. So the structures present there in order that will be running in your projector. The other projector, you will have swelling, ulcer, sinus, fistula, deformity will be running there. This will be separate. If it is thyroid, ultimately you have to establish 3 diagnoses.
Okay,
that is what is important. First is the anatomical diagnosis, physiological diagnosis, and pathological diagnosis. You know what are all the things you have to anatomical diagnose, what you have to find out? Do you know that? Anatomically, you want to know whether it is a solitary nodular goiter. All these things have to be solitary nodular goiter, multinodular goiter, or a diffuse goiter. That is what we have to, anatomically we have to make this diagnosis. It's a solitary nodular goiter, multinodular goiter, or a diffuse goiter, right? And if it is a physiological means, you have to find out. It is very simple. It is hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, or euthyroid. Okay.
Okay, sir.
And pathological diagnosis, whether it is a benign disease or a malignant disease. This is the aim of this examination of thyroid. If you have a thyroid swelling, means this is what is you are going to run through your mind always. So ultimately, you have to say anatomical diagnosis, whether it is a solitary nodular goiter, multinodular goiter, or a diffuse goiter. Only 3 things. Okay. And physiologically, you want to know whether it is euthyroid, hypothyroid, or hyperthyroid. Okay. And if the pathologically it is going to be a benign or malignant. If we differentiate these, the inflammatory thyroiditis, everything comes under benign. Okay, I am not saying benign malignant condition. Benign thyroid disease or a malignant thyroiditis. Benign means all the things other than cancers. I am classifying it as benign for the sake of understanding. Okay, so ultimately, so whenever you are examining this patient, right from the history, this will run in my back of my mind. I want to find out what these 3. When I give you a provisional clinical diagnosis, I give these 3 anatomical, physical, biochemistry, anatomical, physiological, and pathological diagnosis. My diagnosis is going to be complete. Okay, then treatment becomes very, right. So we'll proceed with your history taking. Go ahead.
Mrs. Chandra, 35 years old female, who is a homemaker, coming from Korukapet, came to the OPD with chief complaints of prominent eyes for the past 1 year.
Yes.
History of presenting illness. The patient was apparently normal 1 year back.
What is her age? What is her age?
35 years, sir.
35 years, only prominent eyes. Okay, for how long?
Yes. For the past 1 year, sir.
1 year. Okay, is it normal?
No, sir.
Right. Okay. Right. Go ahead.
History of presenting illness. The patient was apparently normal 1 year back. After that, she noticed prominent eyes associated with increased dryness. No history of itching, redness of eyes, or blood division. No history of diplopia. History of loss of weight, 15 kgs in 1 year. No history of loss of appetite. History of intolerance to heat. History of excessive sweating.
Okay.
History of anxiousness and nervousness. History of tremors. History of diarrhea on and off episodes, 2 to 3 times a day. Semi-solid stools, not blood stain. No mucus, no passage of worms, not foul smelling. No history of vomiting. History of muscle weakness, difficulty in climbing upstairs. History of palpitations. No history of any swelling. No history of fever.
Any swelling in the thyroid region also, there is no swelling. Neck also.
Yes, sir. No swelling, sir.
And you described so many symptoms. All these things, how long they are present?
They are present for the past 1 year, sir.
Okay. So you are trying to tell me that what does all these things, anxiousness, nervousness, tremor, diarrhea, all these things, what does it indicate? The muscle weakness, palpitation, everything.
It is suggestive of hyperthyroidism, sir.
Hyperthyroidism. Yes, good. So it could be a hyperthyroid symptoms, but does it go 35-year-old? Can they develop prominent eye? You are talking about exophthalmos, right?
Yes, sir.
Exophthalmos is seen in which condition?
Primary thyrotoxicosis.
Okay,
So
this is a case scenario, or it's seen in the patient.
it's a case scenario, sir.
Right, I understand that. That's why there is a fault. That's why it is not fitting into the diagnosis. What I am saying is, which thyrotoxicosis you have by exophthalmosis? Primary thyrotoxicosis or secondary thyrotoxicosis?
Primary, sir.
What is the age group for primary thyrotoxicosis?
It is younger age group, sir.
Younger age means what is the age?
Less than 45 years.
No. Graves disease. Graves disease, primary hyperthyrotoxicosis, otherwise primary thyrotoxicosis, usually seen in the teenage group. Teenage group up to 20s. Okay, you don't
Okay,
see
sir.
things in 35 years. When a 35-year-old develops toxicosis, it is more likely to be a secondary thyrotoxicosis where eye signs will not be present. I'll go into that later. So the age is not fitting here. If the age has been 19, 20 or something like that, then it would have been, the scenario would be perfect. But here, the
Okay.
case scenario, 35 years old doesn't fit into the diagnosis at all. That is the thing. I'll come to that. How you differentiate primary, secondary, all these things, I'll come to it. Okay, I'll take this as 19-year-old or a 21-year-old. I'll take it that way. We'll proceed further. Okay?
Okay, sir.
Right.
No history suggestive of pressure symptoms like no history of dyspnea, no history of dysphagia, no history of change in voice, no history of suggestive of Horner syndrome, no history of syncope.
Okay.
No history suggestive of hypothyroidism like no history of weight gain in spite of poor appetite, no history of constipation, no history of cold intolerance, no history of easy fatigability, no history of sudden increase in size.
When you don't have to split it up like this. Actually, you can do that. It gives you a clear idea. So patient has hyperthyroidism symptoms. If he has more or three or more symptoms, the two or three symptoms are there, then you can elaborate on hyperthyroidism itself. You don't have to go for the hyperthyroidism, because all these things are going to be controversial. When you say weight loss is there, and then why should you say no weight gain? In hyperthyroidism, there is going to be increased appetite. Now, why do you want to say there is no history of poor appetite? You understand that you already gave me a history of diarrhea was there. Why should there be no history of constipation? It tells you are doing it as a monotonous way. You are not applying your mind there. Okay. The idea is you are examining the patient. The idea is you are trying to explore what the patient is having. Okay. When there is diarrhea itself, why do you want to ask about constipation? When there is heat intolerance, why do you want to ask about cold intolerance? You understand that? So this
Yes,
is
sir.
when you don't have symptoms. If they don't have any symptoms, or say it's a euthyroid patient, you want to ask about the history of hyperthyroidism. You want history of hypothyroidism. Both the things you want to ask. But here you have given so many histories or suggestive of hyperthyroidism is given. Why do you want to give no negative history for opposite things which already is there? You understand that?
Yes, sir.
Right. So basically, when you are history taking, three things. Usually swelling will be there. No, we won't give you history only with proptosis or anything will not be given to you in surgery. Usually a swelling in the thyroid region will be there. Usually will be there. So your idea is swelling. Apart from the swelling, where you will ask about the swelling, just like I said, mode of onset, progress, description, all these things you do. You will associate relevant illness, like you will go and ask about history of hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, and pressure effects. Hypo and hyper to rule out the functional diagnosis. That pressure effect is to rule out any malignancy is there. That is why you want to go for the pressure effect. So all this history will be covered. You have covered it nicely, but this is just taken from the Idundradal. When you are doing it, you don't have to say negative. When there's cough, you don't have to say where there is diarrhea. You don't have to talk about constipation. If there is altered bowel, you can definitely talk about it.
Okay.
One second. Please. Okay, so let's proceed.
Okay. No history suggestive of malignancy like no history of bone pain, no history of jaundice, no history of cough with hemoptysis, no history of headache, convulsions, and seizures.
Remember that
Past
all these things are extensive metastatic disease only will have bone pain, hemoptysis, convulsions due to brain deposit, all this. These are very, very rare in thyroid disease. Thyroid first manifests itself locally. It becomes locally increasing, then spreads to distant areas. So we don't get such things except in follicular carcinoma or anything like that. Don't worry about it, but it's all covered nicely. Continue.
Past history, no history of similar complaints in the past, no history of previous hospitalization, not a known case of diabetes, hypertension, asthma, epilepsy, tuberculosis, jaundice, ischemic heart disease, no history of irradiation, no history of previous surgery, no history of any drug intake.
Very
A personal history, patient consumes non-vegetarian diet, patient consumes adequate salt, no history of excessive intake of
Why
goitrogens,
do you want to know about
uh,
adequate salt?
iodine deficiencies.
You can say patient consumes iodized salt. No? Iodized salt will suffice. No, you don't have to say adequate salt or anything.
Okay. History of altered bowel habits, diarrhea. History of altered bowel habits, diarrhea on and off episodes. No history of altered sleep pattern. Menstrual history, attained menarche at 15 years of age, irregular cycles for the past 2 years, 4 per 70 days, less flow, not associated with clots or dysmenorrhea. Last menstrual period is 17/10/2017.
Okay. What will be the pattern of polymenorrhea or oligomenorrhea? What will be seen in hyperthyroidism?
Oligomenorrhea, sir.
Oligomenorrhea. What will be in hypothyroidism?
Menorrhagia, sir.
Menorrhagia will be there or polymenorrhea will be there. But remember one thing: if they become very severe hypothyroidism, they can present with amenorrhea also.
Yes, sir.
It can happen. It can go into amenorrhea in both hyperthyroidism and hyperthyroidism. Okay, right. Continue.
Okay. Sir. Family history, no history of similar complaints in the family. Allergic history, no significant allergic history.
Yes.
Summary, 35-year-old female came with complaints of prominent eyes for the past 1 year, palpitations, nervousness, weight loss in spite of good appetite, diarrhea, oligomenorrhea, probably involving pathology of thyroid glands.
Okay. Probably hyperthyroidism. Okay, fine.
Yes.
So there is adequate history in this case to say physiologically it is hyperthyroidism, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so our three diagnosis, one is established. It is a physiological diagnosis established, but pathologically there is no history suggestive of any pressure effect. So chances of malignant disease is less, probably a benign disease, right? Next
Yes,
is
sir.
anatomical diagnosis not
Anatomical.
established now because there is no patient hasn't complained of any swelling at all. So we don't know whether it is a solitary nodular goiter, multinodular goiter, or a diffuse goiter. Okay,
Yes, sir.
so
Yes.
that we'll establish in the clinical examination. Go ahead.
Peripheral significant lymphadenopathy.
Good.
Eye signs, eyeballs are prominent, Dalrymple sign is present, upper sclera is seen above the limbus, and
Yes,
Stellberg
yes,
sign.
yes, yes. Wait. I'll go through because eye science is the only thing. No, so we'll go in detail here. What are all the things? Why is the eyeball becomes prominent in Graves' disease?
Accumulation of fat in the retroorbital space.
Why does it happen? Because of the similar antibodies. Just remember that that's the inflammatory anti-inflammatory. Because it's an autoimmune disease, Graves' disease, the antibodies react there, they retroorbital. So it is prominent. Eyeballs have become prominent. How do you know it is eyeballs are prominent or anything like that? What are all the signs to say patient has exophthalmos? Some people congenitally will have a prominent eyeball, some people will have small eyeball. How do you know when you come to say it is exophthalmos or anything like that? When you will start suspecting exophthalmos?
There will be lid retraction and lid lag.
Yeah, those are all different findings. How do you say literature? Why does I'll come to each pathology separately. When will you say start suspecting exophthalmos? Usually, when you see someone in the eye, the upper margin of the sclerocorneal junction will not be visible. Usually, that
Yes,
will
sir.
be covered by the lid. Once you start seeing the upper margin of the sclera, upper margin of the corneal sclera junction, then you start suspecting the exophthalmosis. So
Okay.
how do you examine exophthalmosis? Say next to the eyes has to be prominent. It has to project out, right? That is one
Yes,
thing
ma'am.
is you see the upper margin of the sclera. Next is the projection of the eyebrow. What test you do to find out whether there's exophthalmos or not? What is Navier-Stokes sign? Have you heard of it?
Yes, sir.
What is it,
The
man?
patient is asked to
Sit
bend
in a
behind.
chair. Sit in a
Yes,
chair. The
sitting.
examiner goes behind and you tilt the you go and stand behind the patient. Okay, you tilt the eye. So and you eyesight should be tangential to the forehead. You make the patient look like this. The eyesight, the examiner will stand behind here. Okay, from there your eyesight should be parallel to tangential to your forehead. And if the eyeball usually because it will be behind the supraorbital ridge. So normally you will not see the eyeball when you see from behind. If the eyeball is projecting beyond that supraorbital ridge, then that means the exophthalmosis is there. So that is called as Navier-Stokes sign. Okay. So when the
Okay,
prominent eyeball, now first thing we want to establish that upper scleral margin is there and whether the eyeball is projecting beyond that. Okay. Right.
okay, sir.
Dalrymple sign. What is Dalrymple sign?
It is a visualization of upper sclera.
Yes, exactly. Why do you see Dalrymple sign? Why do you see the upper sclera in hyperthyroidism? Thyrotoxicity.
To find out X of thumbs.
இல்ல அது correct.
Lid retraction.
Why does the lid retracts?
Mullers muscle.
Yes, exactly.
Spasm.
Mueller's muscle is a palpable. It's a one of the slip of the levator palpebrae superioris. Okay, so one of the slip is innervated by the sympathetic system. In hyperthyroidism, excessive sympathetic activity will be there. So this Mueller's muscle goes into contraction and pulls the eyelid like this. Okay, contraction of the Mueller's muscle, a part of levator palpebrae superioris. So because this retracts like this, you see the upper margin of the sclera. That is Dalrymple sign, right? And also when the retroorbital deposition of fat is there and pushes the eyeball forward, that also will make the sclera. But the important thing to working with pathology in Dalrymple sign is a contraction, retraction of the upper eyelid due to contraction of the levator palpebrae superioris or the Mueller's muscle, right? Okay. What is Stellwachs sign?
It is infrequent blinking of eyelids.
Why do you get infrequent blinking? Each and every sign has a pathology. If you understand that, then you will not miss out any sign at all. The names will be, you will be confused with the exam. What this sign, you will get confused. Don't worry about it. If you understand why it happens, then you will not miss anything. What is, why do you get infrequent blinking? Again, the levator palpebrae superioris is contracted. No, so it doesn't allow it to contract, blink frequently. That is why the Stellwachs sign is present. Infrequent blinking, again due to retraction of the Mueller's muscle that causes this. Okay. What is Von Graff's sign?
Lid lags, sir.
Why does the lid lag? The lid lag again. It is due to
Spasm of the Mueller's muscles.
exactly spasm of Mueller's muscle. So what happens? The upper lid doesn't come down when the eyeball moves. When you ask the patient to follow the finger, ask them the eyeball and the eyelid move together down. But here the eyeball is moving freely because of the normal activity. But in the Mueller's muscle is contraction. So lid, upper lid doesn't follow the eyeball closely. So the eyelid stays back a little bit. It doesn't follow it continuously. When you are asking up to down, when the eyeball looks down, eyelid also follows it down. But here, what happens? Because of the levator palpebrae contraction, it doesn't move in sync with the eyeball. So there is lid lag. Upper lid lags behind the eyeball movement. That is what is lid lag. It's called as Von Graff sign. Yes. Next, what is it?
Enrod sign, sir.
Endra's sign.
Edema of eyelids and conjunctiva.
Conjunctive. Why does it happen?
In severe exophthalmos, it happens.
Why does it happen? Again, retroorbital fatty deposition, you said no, it blocks the lymphatics. So lymphatic drainage is not happening freely. So the conjunctival edema and the lid edema, again, it may not happen very frequently, but conjunctival edema will happen. Lid edema, usually the lymphatics drain through the cervical lymph node, so you don't see anything, but the retroorbital lymphatics are blocked, so you might have conjunctival edema. What is Griffith's sign?
It is difficulty in averting the upper eyelids.
Why do you get that?
It is a retraction of the
Yes,
palpebral
exactly.
secularis.
Okay, next sign.
Intention
Eye signs,
tremor
that's all. What is Geoffroy's sign?
absence of forehead wrinklings.
Why does forehead wrinkling happen? Absence of forehead wrinkling happen?
Eyeball is protruded, so it can easily raise up.
Exactly. So when you ask a patient to follow the lid, when you go up the beyond certain part, the superior orbital region block your vision. So beyond that, you will not be safe. If you ask them to follow, the upper, frontal belly of occipital frontalis retracts the eyelid, the eyebrow like this. So you have a wrinkle there. So it creates the vision little bit, and you can see this completely. You can see it completely. Okay, you can see the ring because of the wrinkling. You can see it very clearly. Okay. The upper eyelid upper wrinkling will be there because of wrinkling. The field of vision is increased a little bit. But here, because the eyeball is protrude, the wrinkling is not going to increase the field of vision or anything like that. Still, they'll without anything, they'll be able to see it because the eyeball is protruding beyond the supraorbital range. So you don't need it. Okay, what is Mobius sign?
It is difficulty in convergence of eyeballs.
Why does it happen?
Inability.
Because the eyeball is protruded in ophthalmosis, the muscles are stretched, so they are difficult. Ophthalmoplegia, external ophthalmoplegia, complete external ophthalmoplegia might happen at a later date. Okay, but initially the simple stretching will not allow the eyeball to move freely, so they might have loss of convergence. Okay, what are the signs? Corneal ulceration might happen because infrequent blinking, the lacrimation may not happen. So the fluid, tears fluid will not be smeared over the eyeball clearly. Dryness of cornea and ulceration might be there. External ophthalmoplegia, again protrusion of the eyeball, the muscles are stretched beyond this, so the movement of eyeball is not there. So they might have external ophthalmoplegia might be there. So these are all the various signs. Still, so many signs are there. I just want basically the pathology in exophthalmos, protrusion of the eyeball. So you can have the wrinkling will be absent, Nabsiger signs will be present, and the upper region of sclera will be there. And retraction of the levator palpebral superiorus, that causes little bit of, and the compression of the obstruction of the lymphatics causes certain signs. And protrusion of the eyeball itself weakens the muscle and they go in for ophthalmoplegia. Because there is inflection breaking, there might be corneal ulceration and dryness might be there. These are all the eye signs we look for. Okay, right.
Okay, so
in general examination, what else you look for? Intention tremor. What is intention tremor?
Tremors at the hands and fingers.
Okay. Intention tremors you don't see in hyper. What is it? Where do you see intentional tremors?
Parkinson.
Intentional tremor is seen in the cerebellar lesions. Cerebellar lesions only you see intentional tremors, where when you try to go and pick it up, because the position sense is lost, they'll be moving like this just to pick it up. That is why the intentional tremor happens in cerebellar thing, because the position sense is altered in cerebellar lesions or vestibular lesions. This might be happening. Okay, in thyroid toxicosis, you get what is called as a fine tremors. Fine tremors is increased sympathetic activity. There is increased sympathetic activity will be there. That's why this fine tremors. This all of us experience when you are tensed up in an examination. Like you are tensed up, you are not relaxed at all. I am not going to decapitate you if you make any mistakes or anything like that. Remember one thing: when you are in a class, always important thing: the person who benefits the most is the person who is present, because always you will be listening to each and every word of me. You will be making the mistakes today. I'll be correcting it, or if you have told me correct things, I'll be going to appreciate you. So you are going to be, you are going to become more happier, and it will stay in your mind longer. Okay, just relax. It's not an exam or anything like that. It's just a learning process. I am also learning with you. You are also learning, right? Okay, so the intention tremor is the important thing you see. Intention tremor you see in cerebellar region. The tremors we see in thyroid toxicosis is fine tremors. So we just have this mild tremor in exams. When you are very tense up, you have that little bit of tremor. No, when you extend like this, that is the tremor or typical of thyroid toxicosis. You can put out, ask them to, you can see in the hands, or you ask them to put out the tongue. The tongue will have a mild tremor. This is how you see for tremors. You don't see intention tremor in thyroid toxicosis, right?
Okay.
Answer.
Okay.
Answer.
Hands are
Go
warm.
back. Go back.
Hands are warm and moist, sir.
Why do you have warm and moist?
In hyperthyroidism, there will be heat intolerance, sir.
Why heat intolerance? Why do you have heat intolerance?
Loss of subcutaneous fat.
Okay. More than that, what is the basic problem in hyperthyroidism?
Sympathetic overactivities.
Sympathetic, basic metabolic rate is increased. The basic metabolic rate is increased. That is the important thing in hyperthyroidism. Remember that. Okay?
Okay.
So there will be increased basal metabolic rate. Now, what increased heat generation will be there? Increased heat generation, body tries to become sweat it out to cool the body down. Okay, that's why the sweating will also increase. But beyond that, the regulatory mechanism will be working at a full stretch, because body is already hot. That body tries to cool it by sweating. So when they are exposed to heat climate, they'll not be able to further compensate and further regulate their. That's why they get intolerant even in slight exposure to heat. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
So basic metabolic rate to increase heat generation. Already the body is trying working overtime to reduce the body temperature. Okay, when they are exposed to heat environment, it becomes even more difficult. Already their regulatory mechanism is working in full tilt. It will be difficult for them. No pre-tibial myxedema. Where do you see pre-tibial myxedema?
In Graves' disease.
Yes. Okay. Why do you see pruritus?
Don't know, sir.
You don't see pruritus. You see scratch marks. You are in general examination, right? If you want
Yes,
to
sir.
know whether the patient has pruritus, the scratch marks you see. You will not see pruritus. Pruritus is a subjective finding. Okay, you will not be seeing pruritus, but you don't get Palmar's erythema. Again, hyperthyroidism can be the thinning of hair, Dupuytren's contraction. Dupuytren's contraction in hyperthyroidism.
Yes, sir.
Okay, right. Next, continue.
No corneal conjunctival ulcers.
Okay, fine.
Vitals, BP 130/80 mmHg measured in left upper limb in sitting posture. Respiratory rate 17 per minute, thoracoabdominal type. Pulse rate 102 per minute, regular in rhythm, normal in volume, no specific character, no radio-radial and no radio-femoral delay, no vessel wall thickening, felt in all accessible peripheral vessels. Temperature is 98 degree Fahrenheit, afebrile.
Good. There is hyper increased pulse rate, which is indicating of hyperthyroidism. Right. Go ahead. Yes.
Local examination.
Okay.
After getting consent from the patient.
So in your clinical scenario, you didn't want any swelling in the neck at all. So there won't be any finding for you. Okay, you would have had a swelling there, which could have been useful. Okay, continue. No problem with that.
Examination in front of neck in the region of thyroid. Inspection.
Okay, nothing is there. Okay, proceed to the next.
Palpation.
Oh, right. Now you have the bile diffuse enlargement. Right, very good. Okay.
Mild diffuse enlargement of the thyroid gland. smooth surface, no nodules, soft in consistency, moves upon deglutition, does not move with protrusion of tongue, lower border is palpable, becomes more prominent on performing Tisselow's method.
Okay.
Uh,
Right. What we'll go one by one. What is moves? Why does it move on deglutition? This is a question definitely asked in a thyroid case. Right. What does it move on deglutition? Thyroid
it is covered by pretracheal fascia, which is attached to cricoid cartilage. So it
Pretracheal
moves
fascia. What is that ligament which attaches to that?
Berry's ligament.
ligament.
Hello?
Berry's ligament, sir.
Suspensor ligament. Actually, the pretracheal fascia arises from here. It is one of the four parts of investing deep cervical fascia has four parts. Investing layer of deep cervical fascia, pretracheal fascia, prevertebral fascia, and carotid sheath. Four components of deep cervical fascia. Of this, pretracheal fascia descends from the thyroid, the hyoid bone. It comes down. What happens is it splits into two. It splits into two and engulfs the thyroid and goes down into the superior mediastinum. Okay, the posterior lamina of the thyroid pretracheal fascia, there is a condensation of the pretracheal fascia there. It forms a thick ligament sort of thing, which is called a suspensor ligament of Berry. This attaches the posterior part of the thyroid gland to the cricoid cartilage and the laryngeal apparatus. Okay, so
Okay.
normally when the patient swallows, the laryngeal apparatus moves up and down. Because the thyroid is attached to the laryngeal apparatus, that is the cricoid cartilage, by suspensor ligament, the thyroid gland also moves with deglutition. This should be your complete answer. So the pretracheal fascia divides anterior and posterior to cover the thyroid gland. Posterior lamina of the pretracheal fascia thickens to form suspensor ligament of Berry, or which attaches the thyroid gland to the cricoid cartilage and the laryngeal apparatus. So normally during deglutition, the laryngeal apparatus, you can see when you see somebody swallows, you can see the thyroid cartilage moving up and down. Okay,
Yes.
this moving up and down, thyroid cartilage moves, the laryngeal apparatus moves with deglutition. 20. இல்ல இது வந்து okay, this because you see the thyroid cartilage moves up and down, the laryngeal apparatus moves up and down deglutition. It is because the thyroid gland is attached. The thyroid cartilage, the laryngeal apparatus moves, the thyroid gland is attached, moves along with this. Why does it not move with protrusion of tongue?
Thyroglossal cyst may move with the protrusion of tongues.
Why does it move?
Because it is attached to the foramen cecum at the posterior
Yes.
aspect of the
Thyroglossal duct in embryology originates at the foramen cecum.
cecum.
Foramen cecum is at the junction of anterior two-third and posterior third of the tongue. There is it originates. The duct comes up, comes down, passes in front of thyroid hyoid, goes behind it, comes down, and ends there in the near the isthmus. What is called as a pyramidal lobe will be there, small lobe. It attaches to the isthmus. Usually the thyroglossal tract duct obliterates into what is called as a thyroglossal tract, because it becomes a fibrous band sort of. If somewhere the duct is not obliterated and the duct is still present, the secretion from the epithelium in the duct forms a cyst. That is the thyroglossal cyst. It is very small. When you put out your tongue, because you are tugging that thyroglossal tract, the cyst also moves with protrusion of tongue. Protrusion of tongue, checking up, very, very important. You don't ask them to, when you do like this, what happens is that jaw also moves up and down, opens and closes. When you ask the patient to protrude out and in like that, the mandible also moves, opens and closes. That also will cause false movement of cyst or something like that. So when you are trying to ascertain the movement with protrusion of tongue, just insert the buccal mucosa between the two upper and lower jaws so that they don't bite the jaw. Then ask them to protrude. See, the jaws doesn't move. When I insert the buccal mucosa in between the two jaws, ask them to protrude out, the jaw doesn't move. Otherwise, if they ask them to do the protrusion of tongue, then what do they do is, so the jaws also move along with it. To avoid that, you do that and then check for the movement. Okay, as you said, thyroglossus cyst moves, but the tract is attached to the thyroid gland also. So why is not thyroid moving with the protrusion of tongue?
The thyroglossal duct obliterates.
Obliterates into cystoglossal tract, and it is attached to the near the isthmus in pyramidal lobe, right? So it is attached to the thyroid also. So the cyst is there along the tract, so it moves. Why is the thyroid not moving? Simple, don't worry about it. Suppose you have a thread and tie it to a small object and pull it, the object will move. If I tie it to a car and just tug it like this, will the car move? It is too heavy to move.
Yes.
Likewise, the thyroid gland is attached to the laryngeal apparatus tightly. You said suspense ligament, all these things are attaching to the laryngeal apparatus. The simple movement of tongue, simple tug will not be enough to move the whole thyroid gland. It's too heavy for the movement of the tongue to protrude. It's still the thyroglossal tract is attached to the isthmus, but because the tongue movement will not be generating sufficient force to lift the thyroid gland, you will not see any movement. Okay, but thyroglossus cyst is very small. That movement is enough to pull the thyroglossus. You understand that?
Okay, sir.
Anybody have any doubt in this? These two things I want you to be very, very clear in this. So the movement with deglutition and movement with protrusion of tongue. Anybody have any doubt?
No, sir.
Right. Okay. All of you are clear. Then we'll go. Lower border palpable. Lower border palpable. What does it indicate?
Retrosternal goiter.
Is there any extension to the mediastinum? If the lower border is palpable now, that means the lower border of thyroid is palpable now. That means it is not going into the mediastinum at all, superior mediastinum at all. There are three types of retrosternal goiters. Do you know what are the three types of retrosternal goiters?
Primary, secondary.
No, not
Substernal, intrathoracic, plunging.
Intrathoracic goiter.
plunging goiter. Very good, very good. So it is normal thyroid gland which is present in the neck with substernal retrosternal extension. Here you will not see the lower border at all. Some part of thyroid is extending behind the sternum. This is called as substernal goiter. That is type 1. Type 2 is plunging goiter. What is plunging goiter?
During intrathoracic, negative intrathoracic pressure, it plunges into the thoracic cavity and they can swell.
I exactly expected this answer. This is the wrong answer. Remember that plunging goiter means the swelling of thyroid will not be in the neck at all. It will be fully in the thorax. When they swallow, the thyroid comes into the neck and goes down. Here it is the outlet, thoracic outlet. Plunging goiter means you are thinking that it will be in the neck and it will be plunging into the neck. When you swallow, the actually thyroid moves up only. Never it can go down. All of you understand that? The plunging goiter is you don't see that when you see a swelling in the neck and it's extending into the thorax, that is in the mediastinum. It is retrosternal goiter. The second type 2 is here you don't see any swelling in the neck. It is fully in the thorax. When they swallow, the thyroid comes into the neck and goes down. This is called as plunging from the thorax into the neck. Okay, so it is reverse side. So that is plunging goiter type 2. Type 3 is the thyroid will be inside the thorax. Even on swallowing, it will not come into the neck. So it is completely intrathoracic. Type 3 is called as intrathoracic goiter. All of you clear with this?
Yes, sir.
So these are all very, very basic concepts. Don't get confused. I just want to take little bit time. Class, Professor. These are all basic concepts. Don't ever have confusion on this. If you have any confusion on this, just get it clarified now. Also, I am ready to clarify it. We can proceed very slowly. Also, no problem at all. Okay, right. Next.
It
Okay.
becomes prominent and
Yes, plane of the swelling.
it is deep to deep fascia, sir.
Okay. What is yours made more prominent on Pizillo's method? What is Pizillo's method?
The patient is asked to take the hands back and
You ask them to keep the
that-
hand and extend. When will you do to Pizillo's method? Is it for ascertaining the plane or make it visible nicely?
to see the swelling.
In short neck individuals, normally you may not be able to see the swelling properly. In those cases, Pizzilo's method, you extend the neck by stretching it. Okay, by doing this, you are extending the neck space so that the thyroid can be visualized very clearly. That is the Pizzilo's methods used. So plane of the swelling, why would you ascertain plane of the swelling? Which is very, very important. When the swelling moves with deglutition itself, it is attached to the laryngeal apparatus. That means it is possibly swelling arising attached to the trachea or laryngeal apparatus. It could be thyroid or a pretracheal lymph node only, which can move with deglutition. Other swellings will not move with deglutitions, right?
Okay, sir.
That itself gives a plane of swelling. But still, for the sake of it, how will you know it is deep to deep fascia?
Mobility, sir.
Plane or deep to deep fascia, how will you look out with mobility? Mobility is a certain different thing.
On extending neck.
Very good, very good. Extending neck, the deep, I told you, the deep cervical fascia is attached to the margin of the mandible to the clavicle. Okay, it is not a active, it is a simple sheet of fibrous tissue. So when I stretch this, I stretch the deep fascia. If the swelling becomes less prominent, that means the swelling is deep to deep fascia. On stretching the deep fascia, if it becomes more prominent, it will be superficial to the deep fascia, right? That's why I objected to the Pizzilo's method of becoming more prominent. I don't want to have you to add there at all. It is just a way of examination. That's all, right? Here, stretching the deep fascia, if it becomes less prominent, it is deep to deep fascia. If it becomes more prominent, it's more. What will you expect in a thyroid? It is deep to deep fascia. Swelling will become less prominent.
Less
correct?
prominent.
Yes, good.
Yes.
And then what test you'll do? Whether it's deep to more than deep fascia. Deep fascia is a passive. What you do to actively to see whether it is deep to deep fascia and the muscles? What test you do?
Contract the sternocleidomastoid.
Very good. Contract the sternocleidomastoid. What test you do to check for the contracting the sternocleidomastoid?
Turn the head to the opposite side.
Turn the head to the opposite against resistance. The right side lobe, you want to see the plane. Class. Class. If you want to see the right side lobe, you turn to the left side against resistance. The right side sternocleidomastoid will contract. The lobe will become less prominent. Now it is deep to deep sternocleidomastoid. If it becomes more prominent, it's superficial muscle, right? So here, if you want both the muscles to contract, what do you do? Chin test. You ask the against resistance, you contract the neck with the pressure in the chin. If both the muscles will contract, if the swelling is diffuse, both lobes are there, both the lobes can become less prominent when the muscles contract. Okay?
Okay, sir.
Right. Okay. Next, you go into that. So we are very clear that it is deep to deep cervical fascia and the sternocleidomastoid. Yes.
Sir, can you repeat that plane of swelling? How do we identify?
Yes. Simple. If it is arising from the skin, skin will not be pinchable. Correct. So for thyroids, when you pinch the skin, that means it is deep to the skin. Okay, over. And you need to see the deep cervical fascia, whether it is superficial to it or deep. When you stretch the neck, what happens? The fascia is attached to the lower mandible and the clavicle. When I do this, simply something like so. This paper is here. It is going to be like this. When I stretch it, it becomes taut. Correct? You will see that when it's normally it is like this. When I do this, it becomes taut. Something deep to it will become less prominent. When something superficial to it will become more prominent. Do you follow that?
Yes,
right?
sir.
That is what deep fascia. Suppose more deep fascia also, if in a big swelling, deep fascia may not be stretching, may not be a good indicator to know whether to find out the plane. So what we use is a sternocleidomastoid. If you want to see the right lobe, whether it is deep to sternocleidomastoid or not, you ask against resistance, you ask them to turn to the opposite side, left side. Against resistance, it becomes less prominent. That means the sternocleidomastoid contracts here, it becomes less prominent. That means it is right lobe it is deep to the sternocleidomastoid. If you want to say the left side, you ask them to move it against resistance on the right side. That makes a left sternocleidomastoid contraction. Suppose you want both the sternocleidomastoid to contract at the same time, you ask them to flex the neck against resistance with the pressure in the chin here. and ask them to do it against resistance to flex the neck. So what happens? Both the sternocleidomastoids contract. If the swelling becomes less prominent, that means the swelling is deep to the sternocleidomastoid. Suppose it becomes more prominent, it will be becoming more prominent. Here in thyroid, definitely whatever be the size of swelling will become less prominent when you do this chin test. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Carotid pulsation.
Carotid pulsation felt against the upper border of thyroid cartilage, equal intensity on both sides. Berry sign is negative.
Right.
Uh,
Where will you see upper border of the thyroid cartilage? Where will you see carotid? Can you palpate on yourself and tell me where is the upper border of thyroid cartilage? So normally, remember, it's not the upper border of you feel it against the upper border of thyroid cartilage. You never feel carotid against the thyroid cartilage. It is much deeper to the thyroid cartilage. What you was trying to tell me is at the level of the upper border of the thyroid cartilage, the sternocleidomastoid is there. Anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid, just deep to it, at the level of upper border of the thyroid cartilage. If you see here, this is the upper border of thyroid cartilage. It goes here. The anterior border of sternocleidomastoid comes like this. So this is the point you will feel where bifurcation of the carotid happens. It bifurcates into external carotid and internal carotid. Normally in medicine, all the pressure pulses or you're feeling now, you will feel it in this point only to check the patient is alive. You want to see the carotid pulse rate, the rhythm, or anything like that. You check in this plate. That is the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid, upper level of the thyroid cartilage. These two line joints, no, here you will normally check for the carotid pulsation. But here in thyroid swelling, that is not the place we want to check it. We want to see the thyroid swelling is here now. The lateral, the swelling is, say the swelling is here and the sternocleidomastoid goes like this. I insinuate the finger between the lateral border of the lateral surface of the thyroid gland and the sternocleidomastoid. I plant my finger between these two things. The lobe of the thyroid is like this. The sternocleidomastoid goes like this. Now, my finger goes in between the lateral border of the thyroid cartilage and the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid and go and feel for the carotid pulsation. Why do we want to see there now? We want to see whether the carotid is infiltrated by the swelling. That is what is the idea here. Okay, here you want to know, so you don't see it in the upper border of thyroid at the level of upper border of thyroid. Here the swelling, thyroid swelling is here like this. The sternocleidomastoid is going like this. I will insinuate my finger between the lateral border of the thyroid gland and the sternocleidomastoid. I will insinuate my finger and feel for the carotid. Why do you want to look at it? I want to know whether the enlarged thyroid swelling is infiltrating into the carotid. I can not feel the pulse in two instances. One case where the swelling is too huge, the carotid is pushed very posteriorly, I am not able to reach it. That is one possibility. Correct? The next possibility is it is a malignant thyroid swelling. It has engulfed the carotid sheath. I will not be able to pass. Okay. So when I am not able, when I am able to feel it, that tells me clearly it is not infiltrated. That is very sure, right? If you are able to feel the carotid pulse lateral to the thyroid lobe, then I am very, very sure that the carotid artery is not engulfed by the malignancy of the thyroid. Correct? If I am not able to palpate it, there might be two reasons. One is the huge thyroid gland might push the carotid behind, and I am not able to access it. One. Next possibility is a malignant thyroid infiltrating into the carotid sheath, so I am not able to feel the carotid. So how do I decide this dilemma, whether this is infiltration or it is a huge gland which is that? Then in this instance, I am not able to feel the carotid pulse here. Then I go back to the upper level of the upper border of the thyroid cartilage and feel it here. If I feel the pulse here, not able to feel it here, that means probably the huge gland is pushing the carotid away. It is not infiltrating. Suppose I'm not able to feel here, not able to feel here also, that means the carotid artery is infiltrated by the malignancy. When you are not able to feel here and feel here also, then it becomes very sign positive.
Okay.
All of you clear with this?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Anybody have doubt? I just want to clarify it once more also, it's not a problem. Anybody have any doubt on this carotid pulsation?
So where we have
Hello?
to palpate at the second time, sir?
Second time, I told you the normal thing, the upper border of the thyroid cartilage, the anterior border of sternocleidomastoid. Normally, we feel that is where it is here. It is here. That is where normally the carotid bifurcates into common carotid bifurcates into external carotid and internal carotid. You feel for pulsation here. If you feel the pulsation here, that means it is not infiltrated here. It is just pushed behind. I am not able to access it here. That's all. So that means it is not malignancy. Suppose I am not able to feel it here also. That means both the places it is absent. That means that tells me it could be a malignant thyroid disease I am looking at. Okay, everybody clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, good. Next.
No palpable thrill. Trachea
Okay.
is in midline. No other
Okay.
swellings present. Coaches and no striders.
Right. Okay. In examination, which position you will examine the thyroid gland normally? These are all very, very important. When you are palpating when you are inspecting, obviously you have to make the patient sit up and you go and stand in front of the patient and look at it. Okay. For palpation, if they ask you in which position you examine you make the patient sit and you go behind the patient and you use your fingers to palpate the thyroid gland from behind. That is how your normal examination should happen. This is a normal thyroid examination. Suppose you have nodules, multiple nodules, you want to find out, then you come to the front and ask the patient to swallow and use your thumb to palpate over the thyroid gland to see when the patient swallows, the swelling will be moving up and down. With the thumb, if you see ups and downs, that means it might be multinodular goiter. This method of using thumb from the front of the patient is called as Kreil's method. Okay, it's called as Kreil's method. Next is the Lahey's method. Suppose you have only one lobe of thyroid, right lobe you want to examine. You use your hand to push it from the left side with the trachea. What happens is the right lobe becomes more prominent. Then you can palpate it nicely with the right lobe. Same way, if you want to examine the left lobe, you push the right lobe from this side and see this left lobe can be palpated very nicely. This method is called as Lahey's method of palpation. Okay. Next is the Cocker's test. You gently, both the lobes you keep on both sides, gently squeeze it. What happens is if the trachea, the patient develops stridor, that means Cocker's test is positive. What does Cocker's test indicate?
It presses on the trachea.
No. All the things are on the trachea. What happens is in a long-standing thyroid swelling, the tracheal rings, usually the C-shaped tracheal rings are very strong. They will not allow the trachea to be compressed. Suppose in long-standing cases, the cartilage loses its strength and becomes tracheomalacia happens. Tracheomalacia means weakening of the thyroid cartilage. So when the weakening of thyroid cartilage happens, when the thyroid trachea might collapse. So when you press it itself, the trachea will collapse and will cause stridor. Breathing difficulty will happen. So to assess whether tracheomalacia is there, that is what the Cocker's test is used for. So why you want to do this now? After surgery, when you remove the thyroid gland, the trachea can collapse and the patient can go in for respiratory distress might happen in the post-operative period. Just to keep ready for any eventuality, you do this Cocker's test. Otherwise, normal people, when child pressure, the tracheal ring will have sufficient strength to prevent the tracheal obstruction and stridor will not happen. If the tracheomalacia is there, the cartilages become very soft because of long-standing thyroid swelling. It might cause stridor. Or if there is a malignancy which is infiltrating the trachea, that is narrowing the lumen, when you press it a little bit, they'll have trachea. So both the things you are worried about the airway in case of surgery.
Okay.
Right? Yes.
Percussion, no retrosternal dullness. Auscultation, no bruit heard.
Very good. Right. Any doubts about the examination of thyroid? Anybody have any questions or doubts regarding examination of thyroid?
Sir?
Yes, pa.
Sir, in the retrosternal goiter, when we tell the patient to swallow, the swelling will come up. If we feel the lower border at that time, what will you say, sir? Whether this
that means that also tells us that it is not having retrosternal extension. That means when the lower border is palpable, whether during swallowing or not swallowing, we don't worry about it. Because we know why you want to assess this now, whether you just do the surgery in the neck alone or the swelling is extending deep inside the chest and we have to need a thoracic surgeon's help also to do surgery. Suppose the swelling comes up on swallowing also, that means you can see the lower border. That means you can get away with the surgery in the neck alone.
So, sir, if the swelling is truly retrosternal, we can never see the lower border on
That is
deglutition also.
yes, substernal extension. You are not on deglutition also. You are not able to. That's why this retrosternal diurnal percussion is also comes into play. Sometimes
Okay.
short neck or anything, you will feel as if the swelling is here. The swelling is you are not able to see the lower border like that. When you extend the neck, ask them to swallow the swelling. You can clearly make out the lower border. That means it is in the neck only. It is not going to. That is what the idea behind is. Everything has an idea, but principle is there. Here you want to know whether it's a huge swelling going into the neck mediastinum also.
Okay, sir.
So then we might need be extra precaution, and you have to take a lot of precautions and preparations when you are planning surgery in those cases. Suppose here, and again, the first 3 types I told you, the substernal extension, plunging goiter, and retrathoracic. The beauty about these 3 things is the first 2 things, the substernal extension and the plunging goiter, have blood supply from the neck only. But the intrathoracic goiter only, the blood supply comes from the thorax. Rest of the other 2 have the supply from the neck only. So it will be still you can do it with the neck surgery itself. So there is no worry about if you see the lower border, that is very, very important.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right. Anybody else? Any doubts?
So good morning, sir.
Yes.
So you said about Gifford sign and you gave an explanation for why it is happening. Can you repeat that, sir?
What is Gifford sign? You tell me.
You said that is difficulty in averting upper eyelid. I didn't understand that portion, sir.
It is something like when can you avert eyelid? When the eyelid is supple and free, you can avert it. Suppose the Muller's muscle is contraction and it is retracting due to this, what will happen? There you will not be able to avert it.
Okay, sir.
That is what I am telling. Just 1 minute. Symptoms of the thyrotoxicosis there, and plus eye signs are there. It will be primary thyrotoxicosis only, will be a diagnosis. But what I am saying, in real life scenario, this is usually presenting in a teenage group. What she told about this patient is 35 years age. You don't see like that in 35-year-old. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, sir.
You understand that?
Sir, yes, sir. Sir, but the patient is also having palpitation, so that will not be a serious condition.
Palpitation, again, palpitation alone, due to increased sympathetic activity, due to circulating thyroid, increased pulse rate is there. That is what palpitation tells you. Palpitation, even if you walk a little bit of flight of stairs, you will feel the palpitation. So palpitation alone doesn't say serious symptoms. When you have cardiac failure or anything, pedal edema, all these things comes, then we think of hyperthyrotoxicity.
Okay, sir.
Understand that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right? And then what are all the investigations you do? You do thyroid profile. Thyroid profile, again, remember that free T3, free T4 should be done, not the total T3, total T4, because the thyroid binding globulin will be increased in case of oral contraceptive intake, pregnancy, all these things. So the total T3 level might be high sometimes. So we are not worried about the total T3. Free thyroxine. Free T3 and free T4 is very, very essential for assessing this. So T3, T4 is raised and TSH is low, now it is hyperthyroidism. If TSH is raised and T3, T4 low, now hypothyroidism. TSH is raised, T3, T4 is still normal, now subclinical hypothyroidism. I am just rushing all these things because I think all of you know these things. Why do you do ultrasound neck? What is the things you want to know?
To see any nodules.
Yes, the nodule is cystic or solid. That is what we want to make out with thyroid. Whether the whole thyroid is involved, multinodular or diffuse goiter is there, that you want to know. Whether lymph nodes are there. These are all the 3 things you want to know from ultrasound. Whether nodules are there or diffuse goiter is there. If it is single nodule or multiple nodule. Whether the nodules are solid or cystic. And any lymph nodes are there. These are all the information we'll get it from USG. X-ray neck, again, when there is tracheal narrowing due to tracheomalacia, the cartilage is weakened, then tracheal narrowing is there, that might be picked up in X-ray neck. Sometimes very rarely calcification, they say, can be seen in papillary carcinoma due to some bodies, but I am yet to see one, but still it is mentioned there. That is what the X-ray neck important. Sleeping pulse rate, again, when the patient sleeps, the basal sympathetic activity decreases. So if normal patient, even if they are anxious, the sympathetic will go to the normal level. So the pulse rate will return to normal when they are sleeping. Sleeping pulse rate, should not wake up the patient. The patient should be sleeping. You should go and check the pulse rate. If it comes back to normal, if it is normal, even if it's high when you are checking it, when the patient is sleeping, you check it. The patient may not be hyperthyroid. But in hyperthyroid patient, the sympathetic activity is elevated all the time. So even when they are sleeping, when you check the pulse rate, it will be high. That is the most important thing. FNAC is done to look for any malignant cells. Well differentiated malignancies cannot be differentiated from like follicular carcinoma, invasive or in situ cannot be found out with FNAC. That is the most important thing you should remember, because both the follicular cells only will be seen in well differentiated malignant cells. So invasion of the basement membrane only will tell you whether it is invasive carcinoma or non-invasive carcinoma. So FNAC may not be good enough for diagnosing an invasive malignant cells. Okay, the laryngoscopy, again, indirect or direct laryngoscopy. Usually you do indirect laryngoscopy just to make sure whether the vocal cords are moving beforehand. Suppose the vocal cord are not moving due to some subacute viral infection or anything, vocal cord palsy is there already, then you may not pick it up when you are doing laryngoscopy, you may not pick it up. So during surgery, after surgery, if the vocal cord is not moving, they will blame it on your surgery. That's why to ascertain whether the vocal cords are moving, you want to do laryngoscopy before it's done. Thyroid stimulating antibodies and the and thyroid, all these things is needed just to make sure whether it is thyroiditis or not. If the anti-microsomal antibodies, anti-centromere antibodies, anti-thyroid receptor antibodies, all these things are there. So auto-antibodies for thyroid, if they are raised, it indicates it could be a thyroiditis. Case of thyroiditis. Radioactive iodine uptake was done previously to all cases to know whether it is hypo or cold nodule. They thought it is malignancy. Hot nodule is not, cold nodule is malignancy, hot nodule is not like that. But it is no longer used for that because the thyroid function test has come. The thyroid uptake done is not at all useful on all the six. It is useful in 2 or 3 cases only. If there is thyroid is not in the present in the norm, ectopic thyroid there. This thyroid active thyroid uptake might help you in locating the thyroid. 1. Number 2, if there is a solitary nodular goiter and the patient has hyperthyroidism, then you want to know whether the nodule is hyperfunctioning or the remaining whole thyroid gland is hyperfunctioning. This radioactive thyroid scan might be useful. There are 2. If the nodule alone is hyperfunctioning, it becomes a toxic adenoma. Toxic adenoma means you can do hemithyroidectomy and the patient will become organ. If the whole gland is hyperfunctioning, then you have to do a totothyroidectomy or a subtotothyroidectomy. That is what you want to do. Right? Okay, next. So again, when you are giving diagnosis, you have to do 3 things. Anatomical diagnosis, physiological diagnosis, and pathological diagnosis, I say. So what are all the indications for surgery? Then they ask you what are all the indications for surgery. Here the patient has thyrotoxic. So what you expect is you have T3, T4 will be elevated, TSH will be low. How will you control it? With drugs. What is the drug normally used? We use 2 drugs basically. Carbimazole, that is carbimazole we use. Minimum is 5 milligram TDS. You go up to 40 milligram TDS also you can use. Indral, that is non-selective beta blockers. Propranolol is used. Sometimes 10 milligram to 40 milligram TDS can be used daily for treatment of control of thyroid. So you just, it's a trial and error, Mari. You start with the lower, do after some time, do the thyroid protocol. Whether thyroid protocol come back to normal. If it is come back to normal, you continue with the same dose. If it is high, you increase the dose of antithyroid drugs. Like that, you bring it to normal. Then we plan for surgery. If you don't prepare patient adequately, then the patient might go in for thyroid storm in the post-operative. What is that? I'll come to a little bit later. Okay, this is what it is: investigation and treatment part of hyperthyroidism. Treatment, there are indications, 4 indications when you do surgery for thyroid. If they ask, there are 4 indications for surgery. When there is hyperthyroidism is there, functionally the thyroid is functioning, you might want to do surgery. When there is malignancy, you want to do surgery. When there is cosmetic thing, then you want to do surgery. When there is pressure effect, you want to do surgery. So basically 4 indications. One is when there is hyperfunctioning of the thyroid gland, when there is malignancy, when there is pressure effect, when there is increased size of the cosmetic reasons. These are all the 4 reasons for doing surgery. What are all the surgeries you do? Basically 3 surgeries they tell you. One is hemithyroidectomy, second is subtotothyroidectomy, 3 is totothyroidectomy. Hemithyroidectomy is done for solitary nodular goiter alone. In solitary nodular goiter, after investigation also there is no other nodule, then we do hemithyroidectomy. Hemithyroidectomy is removing that lobe, one lobe along with the isthmus is called as hemithyroidectomy. Subtotothyroidectomy is you remove both the lobes with the isthmus, leaving a sleeve of thyroid tissue in the tracheoesophageal groove. This is just to protect the parathyroids and the recurrent angina. This is not to protect the function of the thyroid. This sleeve of tissue will not be enough to maintain the thyroid hormonal function. So what is subtotothyroidectomy? You remove both lobes of the thyroid gland with the isthmus, leaving behind a sleeve of the thyroid tissue in the tracheoesophageal groove. They will say 1/4, 1/6, all these things are nomenclatures. I feel sleeve of thyroid tissue in the tracheoesophageal groove just to protect the recurrent angina and the parathyroid gland. Okay, totothyroidectomy is removing the whole gland completely. Nowadays, subtotothyroidectomy is not in vogue. They say either you do semithyroidectomy or totothyroidectomy. But for MBBS undergraduate level, everybody expects you to say subtotothyroidectomy also. So that's why I have covered it for you also. So if in multinodular goiter also they say subtotothyroidectomy, in hyperfunctioning also, if non-malignant cases they say subtotothyroidectomy for hyperfunctioning thyroid tissue or multinodular goiter. For malignancy we say totothyroidectomy. Okay, if there are lymph nodes are present, what we do is we do what is called as functional neck dissection. Functional neck dissection is you remove the whole lymph nodes on that side, preserving the sternocleidomastoid, accessory nerve, and the interjugular vein. All these things are preserved. All 3 structures are preserved. This is called as the functional neck dissection. In case of you do totothyroidectomy plus functional neck dissection, this is what we do. Then I want to touch upon 3 things. Complications of surgery. Always I told you primary hemorrhage, secondary hemorrhage, reactionary hemorrhage. I told you primary is when you cut it. Reactionary is within 24 hours when the slippage of ligature is there. Secondary hemorrhage when it's infection. And 1 week later it happens bleeding. And the problem is recurrent laryngeal nerve injury might be the major which can affect the voice chain or distance. Important, most danger is bilateral partial injury of the recurrent laryngeal nerve is the most dangerous thing because the cords will go in for adducted position and they will have severe stridor. That is the most important. Even in bilateral total damage also, the ward will go into cadaveric position. They'll be able to breathe. They will not be going to stridor. But in the voice will be gone definitely. But no injury is the best thing. But bilateral partial injury is the more dangerous. Okay. And the important thing is post-operatively, hypothyroidism has to be managed with thyroxine replacement. When you do thyroidectomy, you check the thyroid level, function level, and see how the T3, T4, TSH. Based on that, you replace the thyroxine. Okay, and then suppose totothyroidectomy, you have removed the parathyroid also. Calcium hypocalcemia might go. They can go in for tetany. They can go in for tetany. For that, replacement with calcium is very, very important for them to maintain their thing. And important thing is if the hyperthyroid patient is not prepared well and taken up surgery, they go in for thyroid storm. Thyroid storm is severe symptoms of hyperthyroidism plus hyperpyrexia, increased sweating, dehydration, all these things. There's hyperpyrexia, dehydration, and sweating, in profuse sweating, and hyperthyroidism symptoms will be there. How do you manage it now? Thyrotoxicosis. You give anti-thyroid drugs, and then we use to bring down the fever. Tepid sponging is done. For dehydration and sweating, you give lot of fluids. IV crystalloids are given to replace the fluids, and then you give steroids sometimes to maintain this, and you give beta blockers also to protect. All these things are used for treating the thyroid storm. I think I have covered everything. Any doubts? We have just 2 minutes before 12 o'clock. I just want any quick doubts. I'll clarify you.
Thank you, sir.
I think all these things are recorded. You go through this. I just went through all the points quickly because time is of essence. I just want you to go through the recordings. If you have doubts, I can ready to do it once more also next time. No problem at all. Any doubts now, ma'am? Anyone?
Sir?
Any doubts for anyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sir, it is a very basic doubt. I want to know thyrotoxicosis, hyperthyroidism, Graves' disease. Are these terms are interchangeable? Like, what is the exact definition?
Acropathy, dermopathy, and hyperthyroidism together is called as thyrotoxicosis. Thyrotoxicosis means it is a hyperthyroidism is just a value. If your T3, T4 level is raised, it is called as hyperthyroidism. When you have symptoms of this also along with this, then it is called as thyrotoxicosis. When you have clinical symptoms, when you have eye signs, acropathy and dermopathy all combined together, then we call it as Graves' disease.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I think 12 o'clock is over. I don't want to delay you for the next class. You can note down your doubts and I'll clarify if anything is there next time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.